The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Elena Morrison heard her father's heavy boots on the wooden floor downstairs. She knew that sound meant trouble. For weeks now, Papa had been pacing the house like a caged animal, muttering about the failed crops and the mounting debts that seemed to grow bigger every day. Elena pulled her thin shawl around her shoulders and quietly made her way down the creaky stairs. Through the kitchen doorway, she could see her parents sitting at the old oak table, their faces grave in the dim candlelight. Mama's hands were folded tightly in her lap, and Papa's weathered face looked older than his 50 years. "We don't have a choice, Margaret," Papa was saying, his voice heavy with resignation. "The bank wants their money by the end of the month or we lose everything." Elena pressed herself against the wall, her heart beating fast. She knew she shouldn't listen, but something in her father's tone made her freeze in place. "There has to be another way, Thomas," Mama whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "She's our daughter, not cattle to be traded." "You think I don't know that?" Papa's fist hit the table with a dull thud. "You think this is easy for me? But what choice do we have? The drought killed everything. 2 years in a row, Margaret. 2 years of nothing but dust and dead plants." Elena felt her stomach drop. They were talking about her. She was 22 years old, which most people in their small town of Cedar Falls considered almost too old for marriage. She had always been grateful for that extra time, using it to help her family and dream about maybe one day seeing something beyond the endless Colorado prairie. "Cornelius Blackwood has made a generous offer," Papa continued, and Elena had to bite her lip to keep from gasping out loud. Everyone in 3 counties knew about Cornelius Blackwood. He owned the biggest cattle ranch in the area and had more money than most people could imagine. He was also known for his terrible temper and the mysterious way his previous wives had either died young or disappeared without explanation. "That man is dangerous, Thomas," Mama said firmly. "You know what people say about what happened to his first wife. And the second one just vanished one night. Nobody ever saw her again." "People say a lot of things," Papa replied, but Elena could hear the doubt in his voice. "Look, I don't like it either, but he's offering enough money to pay off all our debts and keep us going for at least 2 years. That's time for the land to recover, time for us to get back on our feet." Elena's younger sister Clara appeared beside her in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's happening?" she whispered. Elena quickly pulled Clara back toward the stairs, but they could still hear their parents talking. "She's a good girl, Thomas. She deserves better than to be sold off to that horrible man," Mama was saying. "You think I don't know that?" Papa's voice cracked. "She's smart and kind and she deserves the world, but right now I can give her survival. That's all I can offer any of us." Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. She had always known that life was hard for farming families, especially during bad years, but she had never imagined that her own father would consider trading her away like a piece of property. Clara tugged on Elena's nightgown. "What are they talking about? Why does Mama sound so sad?" "Shh," Elena whispered, leading her sister back upstairs. "Go back to bed. Everything will be okay." But Elena knew nothing would be okay. As she tucked Clara back into the small bed they shared, her mind raced with the terrible reality of what she had overheard. Her father was planning to arrange her marriage to Cornelius Blackwood in exchange for enough money to save their farm. The next morning, Elena went through her usual chores like she was moving through thick mud. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, helped Mama with breakfast, and tried to act normal. But every time she looked at her father, she felt a mixture of anger and sadness that made her chest tight. It was Clara who finally told her the truth. Elena was hanging laundry on the line behind their small farmhouse when her sister came running up, her face flushed with excitement and worry. "Elena, you'll never believe what I heard," Clara said, looking around to make sure nobody else could hear them. "Mrs. Peterson from the next farm over was talking to Mama this morning, and she said that Papa has arranged for you to marry Mr. Blackwood." Elena's hands stopped moving. A wet sheet hung half-pinned to the line, dripping water onto her shoes. "What exactly did you hear?" "Mrs. Peterson said the whole county is talking about it. Apparently Papa went to see Mr. Blackwood last week, and they made some kind of deal. The wedding is supposed to happen in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Elena felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. 3 weeks to prepare for a life she didn't want with a man she barely knew, and certainly didn't trust. That afternoon, Elena walked into town to help Mrs. Henderson at the general store, something she did twice a week to earn a few extra coins for her family. Cedar Falls was a small place where everyone knew everyone else's business, so Elena wasn't surprised when Mrs. Henderson immediately brought up the subject of her upcoming marriage. "Oh, honey," the older woman said, shaking her gray head as she organized canned goods on the shelf. "I heard the news about you and Cornelius Blackwood. I have to say I'm worried about you." Elena tried to keep her voice steady. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Henderson looked around the store to make sure they were alone, then leaned closer to Elena. "That man has a dark history with women, dear. His first wife, Catherine, was a sweet girl from Denver. She married him when she was about your age. Within 2 years, she was dead. The doctor said it was an accident, that she fell down the stairs, but Catherine's sister told me she had bruises on her arms that looked like finger marks." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "And his second wife? Mary Beth Thompson. She was a local girl, actually. Her family needed money just like yours does now." Mrs. Henderson's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "She lasted about 6 months before she disappeared one night. Just vanished like she never existed. Blackwood claimed she ran off with some traveling salesman, but Mary Beth wasn't that kind of girl. She was quiet and scared of her own shadow. Did anyone look for her? Her brother tried, but Blackwood has a lot of influence in this area. The sheriff said there was no evidence of foul play, just a woman who decided to leave her husband. Case closed." Mrs. Henderson placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "I'm telling you this because I care about you, dear. That man is dangerous." Elena spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about Mrs. Henderson's words while she helped customers and swept the store. Every time someone mentioned her upcoming wedding, they either congratulated her with forced smiles or gave her pitying looks that made her feel sick to her stomach. When she walked home that evening, Elena felt like she was walking toward a prison. The small farmhouse that had always been her safe place now felt like a cage. Her little sister met her at the door, chattering excitedly about the wedding dress Mama was planning to make from an old curtain fabric they had stored in the attic. "It's going to be so beautiful, Elena. And Mama says after you're married, we might be able to afford real store-bought fabric for Christmas dresses this year." Elena forced a smile for Clara's sake, but inside, her heart was breaking. Her family was so happy about the financial relief her marriage would bring that they seemed to have forgotten she was a person with feelings and dreams of her own. That night at dinner, Papa finally spoke to Elena directly about the arrangement. "Elena, I want you to know that Mr. Blackwood is a respected man in this community. He has a large house and more than enough money to take care of you. You'll never have to worry about having enough food or warm clothes." Elena looked around, the table at her family. Besides Clara, there were her 2 younger brothers, James and Timothy, ages 15 and 12. They were both too thin from the lean times, and she could see hope in their eyes when Papa talked about the money from her marriage. "When is the wedding?" Elena asked quietly. 3 weeks from Saturday," Papa replied. "Mr. Blackwood wanted to have the ceremony sooner, but I told him we needed time to prepare properly." 3 weeks. Elena nodded and continued eating her thin soup, but she could barely taste it. After dinner, she helped Mama with the dishes while her brothers played outside in the last light of evening. "Mama," Elena said carefully, "do you think this is the right thing?" Her mother was quiet for a long moment, her hands still in the soapy water. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and sad. "I think your father is doing the only thing he knows how to do to keep this family alive. But that doesn't make it easy, and it doesn't mean I'm happy about it." "Are you worried about Mr. Blackwood?" Mama's hand stopped moving. "I've heard stories, Elena. I won't lie to you about that. But I've also heard stories about families who lost their farms and ended up scattered to the wind, children going hungry, parents dying from exhaustion and heartbreak. Your father sees this marriage as a way to prevent that from happening to us. But what about what I want? Oh, my dear girl. Mama turned to face her, and Elena could see tears in her eyes. If wanting was enough to change our situation, don't. You think I would have wished us out of this mess a long time ago? Sometimes life doesn't give us choices we like. Sometimes we have to choose between bad and worse. That night, Elena lay in bed next to Clara, staring at the ceiling and listening. 1 week after Elena learned about her arranged marriage, a stranger rode into Cedar Falls. It was a Tuesday morning, and the town was going about its usual business when the lone rider appeared on the dusty main street, leading a pack horse behind him. The man looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that had seen many miles of hard travel. His horse was a sturdy brown mare that looked well cared for despite being travel-worn. What caught people's attention wasn't his appearance, though. It was the way he sat his horse, easy and confident, like someone who was comfortable anywhere the road might take him. Elena was sweeping the front steps of the general store when she first saw him ride past. Something about the stranger made her pause and watch as he dismounted in front of the Silver Dollar Saloon. There was a kindness in his face that was different from most of the rough men who passed through their small town. Inside the saloon, the stranger introduced himself to Tom Riley, the bartender, as Jake Caldwell. He ordered a beer and asked about getting a room for the night at the boarding house down the street. Just passing through? Tom asked, wiping down a glass with a dirty rag. Heading to Wyoming territory, Jake replied. Got some land up there that belonged to my father. Figure it's time to make something of it. Tom nodded approvingly. Wyoming's good country for a man who's not afraid of hard work. What kind of operation you planning to run? Horses, mostly. Maybe some cattle eventually, but I've always had a way with horses. Jake took a sip of his beer and looked around the saloon. It was still early in the day, so the place was mostly empty, except for a couple of local men playing cards in the corner. Speaking of hard work, one of the card players called out, You hear about Tom Morrison's daughter getting hitched to Cornelius Blackwood? Jake didn't know any of these people, but something in the man's tone made him listen more carefully. Poor girl, the other card player replied, shaking his head. She's too good for that snake, but I guess Morrison doesn't have much choice. His farm's been failing for 2 years running. Tom Riley leaned across the bar, lowering his voice. That Blackwood's got a dark reputation with women. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances, and the second one just up and disappeared one night. Nobody's seen hide nor hair of her since. You really think he killed them? The first card player asked. I don't know for sure, Tom replied. But I wouldn't want my daughter marrying him, that's for certain. The Morrison girl seems like a sweet thing. Always polite when she comes to town, helps out at Henderson's store without expecting much pay. She deserves better than what she's getting. Jake found himself thinking about this conversation long after he left the saloon. He had seen enough of the world to know that bad things happen to good people all the time. But something about this situation bothered him more than usual. Maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control. After getting a room at the boarding house and stabling his horses, Jake walked around the small town to get his bearings. Cedar Falls was like dozens of other frontier towns he had seen, with a main street lined with businesses and houses scattered around the edges like seeds thrown by the wind. It was outside the small white church that he accidentally encountered Elena Morrison. She was carrying a basket of wildflowers she had picked for her mother, walking with her head down like she was lost in troubled thoughts. When she turned the corner, she bumped right into Jake, scattering purple and yellow flowers across the dusty ground. Oh, I'm so sorry, Elena said, immediately dropping to her knees to gather the flowers. Her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment and she wouldn't look directly at Jake. No harm done, miss, Jake replied, kneeling down to help her collect the scattered blooms. These are real pretty flowers. You pick them yourself? Yes, out by Miller's Creek, Elena said softly. My mother loves wildflowers and I thought they might cheer her up. She's been sad lately. Jake handed her the flowers he had gathered, and for just a moment their eyes met. He saw intelligence there and kindness, but also a deep sadness that seemed too heavy for someone so young. I hope they help, Jake said gently. Sometimes the simplest things can make the biggest difference. Elena managed a small smile. Thank you for helping me, Mr. Caldwell. Jake Caldwell. And you're Miss Morrison, aren't you? Elena's face went pale. How did you know that? Small town, Jake said with a reassuring smile. Word travels fast. I heard you have a wedding coming up. Congratulations. The word, congratulations, seemed to hit Elena like a physical blow. Her smile disappeared completely, and she clutched the flowers tighter against her chest. Thank you, she whispered, but Jake could tell she didn't mean it. Well, I better let you get those flowers to your mother, Jake said, tipping his hat. It was nice meeting you, Miss Morrison. Elena nodded and hurried away, but Jake stood there for a long moment watching her go. Everything about her body language spoke of someone who was deeply unhappy, and her reaction to the mention of her wedding confirmed what he had heard in the saloon. This wasn't a love match, this was a business arrangement, and Elena Morrison was paying the price. That evening, Jake ate dinner at the boarding house with the other guests, mostly traveling, salesmen and a family moving west to Oregon. The conversation naturally turned to local news, and once again, Elena's upcoming marriage came up. It's a shame about the Morrison girl, said Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who ran the boarding house. She's such a lovely young lady, always, helping folks when they need it. But that Blackwood, she shook her head disapprovingly. What's wrong with him? Asked one of the traveling salesmen. I heard he's got money. Money isn't everything, Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. That man has buried 2 wives already, and both of them died young. The first one supposedly fell down the stairs, but there were whispers about bruises on her body that didn't match up with a fall. The second one vanished in the middle of the night about 6 months after they married. He claimed she ran off with another man, but nobody believed it. Why doesn't someone do something about it? Jake found himself asking. Mrs. Patterson looked at him with sad eyes. What can anyone do? He's got money and influence, and the Morrison family is desperate. The drought killed their crops 2 years running, and they're about to lose their farm. Blackwood offered enough money to save them, but only if he gets the daughter as part of the deal. So she's being sold, Jake said quietly. That's a harsh way to put it, but yes, that's essentially what's happening. And the worst part is, she knows it. You can see it in her eyes when you talk to her. That poor girl knows exactly what kind of man she's marrying, but she's sacrificing herself to save her family. After dinner, Jake walked out to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The stars were bright in the clear sky, and the air was cool and fresh. He thought about Elena Morrison and the conversation he had overheard earlier. Jake had spent most of his adult life drifting from place to place, working cattle drives and odd jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. His father had left him land in Wyoming territory, but Jake had been putting off going there because he wasn't sure he was ready to settle down. Now, for the first time in years, he found himself thinking about more than just his own future. He had seen enough cruelty in the world to recognize it when he heard about it. Cornelius Blackwood sounded like the kind of man who used his money and power to hurt people weaker than himself, and Elena Morrison was about to become his latest victim. The thought of that kind, intelligent young woman trapped in a marriage with a dangerous man made Jake's chest tight with anger. But what could he do? He was a stranger in this town with no connections and no influence. He had some money saved up from years of working, but probably not enough to compete with whatever Blackwood was offering the Morrison family. And even if he did have that kind of money, why would they trust a stranger over a deal they had already made? Jake spent most of the night walking around town and thinking. By morning, an idea had begun to form in his mind. It was crazy and risky, and there was no guarantee it would work. But the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that he had to try. The next day, Jake made some inquiries around town. He learned that Thomas Morrison owed money to 3 different creditors: the bank, the seed company, and the blacksmith who had done work on his farm equipment. The total amount was substantial for a farming family, but it wasn't more than Jake had saved from his years of working cattle drives and living simply. He also learned more about Elena herself. According to Mrs. Henderson at the general store, Elena was well educated for a frontier girl. She could read and write better than most people in town, was good with numbers, and had a natural way with animals, especially horses. She had been helping her family run their small farm since she was old enough to work, and everyone who knew her spoke highly of her character. If that girl had been born into different circumstances, she could have done anything. Mrs. Henderson told Jake when he stopped by the store, "She's got the kind of mind that could run a business or teach school. It's a terrible waste to see her married off to a man like Blackwood." As the sun began to set on Friday evening, Elena told her mother she was going for a walk to pick more wildflowers. Her stomach was twisted with nervousness as she made her way down the dusty road toward Miller's Creek. She had no idea what Jake Caldwell wanted to tell her, but something in his eyes had convinced her that she needed to hear him out. The old barn he had mentioned belonged to a farmer who had moved away 2 years earlier. It stood empty now, its red paint faded and peeling, but it was still sturdy enough to provide shelter from the wind. Elena arrived first and waited in the shadows, her heart beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Jake appeared a few minutes later, leading his horse. He tied the animal to a post and walked toward the barn where Elena was waiting. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Elena admitted. "But I keep thinking about what you said, about how what you have to tell me might change everything. I need to know what you meant." Jake took off his hat and ran his hand through his dark hair. Now that the moment had come, he wasn't sure how to begin. "Miss Morrison, what I'm about to say is going to sound crazy, and I wouldn't blame you if you thought I had lost my mind. But I need you to hear me out before you say anything." Elena nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I know about your upcoming marriage to Cornelius Blackwood," Jake began. "And I know it's not something you want, but something you feel you have to do to save your family's farm." Elena's cheeks flushed red. "I don't know what you've heard." "Say, please," Jake interrupted gently. "Let me finish. I also know what people say about Blackwood, about what happened to his previous wives. You're walking into a dangerous situation, and everyone in town knows it, but nobody seems to think there's anything that can be done about it." Elena looked down at her hands. "There isn't anything that can be done about it. My family needs the money he's offering, and I'm the only thing of value we have to trade." "That's where you're wrong," Jake said firmly. "You do have another choice, if you're brave enough to take it." Elena looked up at him with confused eyes. "What do you mean?" Jake took a deep breath. "Come with me to Wyoming Territory. I have land there, good land that can support a ranch and farm. I'm not asking you to marry me," he added quickly, seeing the alarm in her expression. "I'm asking you to come as a free woman, to make your own choices about your future." Elena stared at him like he had spoken in a foreign language. I don't understand. You barely know me. Why would you make such an offer?" "Because I've seen enough of the world to know the difference between right and wrong," Jake replied. "And what's happening to you is wrong. You're being forced to sacrifice your happiness, maybe your life, for circumstances beyond your control. If I can do something to change that, then I should. But my family, I have money saved from years of working cattle drives," Jake interrupted. "Enough to pay off your family's debts and give them a fresh start. They wouldn't need Blackwood's money if they had mine instead." Elena felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. "You would do that? Give your money to strangers?" "Your family wouldn't be getting the money for nothing," Jake explained. "I'd be getting something valuable in return. The knowledge that I helped save an innocent woman from a dangerous situation. And if you came to Wyoming with me, you'd be helping me build my ranch. It would be a fair trade, not charity." Elena walked to the barn window and stared out at the darkening sky. Everything Jake was saying sounded impossible, like something from one of the adventure books she used to read as a child. "I still don't understand why you would do this," she said, without turning around. "You don't know me at all." Jake joined her at the window. "I know enough. I know you're kind because I saw how gentle you were when you dropped those flowers and how you worried about cheering up your mother. I know you're intelligent because I can hear it in the way you talk. And I know you're strong, because you're willing to marry a man you don't love to save your family. Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. But I can't just abandon my family. They've taken care of me my whole life. You wouldn't be abandoning them, Jake said softly. You'd be saving them in a different way. Think about it. If you come with me and help me establish a successful ranch, you could send money back to help them. You could visit them. You could invite them to come to Wyoming once things are settled. You'd be giving them security without sacrificing your own life. Elena turned to face him, and Jake could see the hope and fear warring in her expression. What exactly are you proposing? If I came with you, what would my situation be? You'd have your own room in the ranch house, Jake said. I'd treat you with respect and give you time to figure out what you want to do with your life. If you decided you wanted to marry me eventually, I'd be honored. If you decided you wanted to marry someone else or not marry at all, that would be your choice. The only thing I'd ask is that you help me get the ranch started. And you think I could actually be useful on a ranch? Jake smiled. Mrs. Henderson tells me you're good with horses and numbers, and that you work harder than most men she knows. Those are exactly the skills I need in a partner. Business partner, he added quickly. Elena was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything Jake had said. It sounded too good to be true, but there was something in his manner that made her believe he was sincere. There would be other families traveling to Wyoming territory in the next few weeks, Jake continued. You'd have proper company and protection for the journey. There's a family named the Johnsons who are heading out with their 3 children, and an older couple, the Washingtons, who are going to start a store in a town called Laramie. You wouldn't be traveling alone with me. This detail seemed to ease some of Elena's concerns. How long would the journey take? About 6 weeks, depending on the weather and how fast the wagons can travel. It's not an easy trip, but it's not dangerous if you're prepared for it. Elena thought about the alternative, marrying Cornelius Blackwood in just over a week and spending the rest of her life wondering if she would disappear like his second wife or die under mysterious circumstances, like his first. If I said yes, she said slowly, when would we have to leave? Soon, Jake admitted. The Johnson family is planning to leave next Tuesday. That gives us 4 days to get everything arranged. 4 days. Elena felt panic rising in her chest. That's not very much time. I know it's scary, Jake said gently. Believe me, I understand how frightening it must be to think about leaving everything you know behind. But think about how frightening it is to stay. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. My father would never agree to this. He's already made the arrangement with Blackwood. Then we don't tell him until the last minute, Jake said. I can leave the money to pay off your family's debts with a letter explaining what happened. By the time they find out you're gone, we'll be far enough away that they can't force you to come back. That sounds like running away. Sometimes running away is the bravest thing you can do, Jake replied, especially when you're running toward freedom instead of away from it. Elena walked back to the center of the barn, her mind racing. Everything about this situation felt impossible and overwhelming, but also like the answer to prayer she hadn't even known she was praying. What would people say? She asked. About me leaving with a stranger? People always talk, Jake said. The question is, would you rather have them talking about the woman who had the courage to choose her own life, or the woman who married Cornelius Blackwood and disappeared 6 months later? Elena shivered at the bluntness of his words, but she knew he was right. Everyone in town expected her to become another casualty of Blackwood's dangerous appetites. Nobody expected her to fight back. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Jake replied. But I need to know by Sunday evening. The Johnson family is leaving Tuesday morning, and I need time to make arrangements if you decide to come. Elena nodded. Where should I find you if I decide to accept your offer? I'll be camped by Miller's Creek Sunday night. There's a big cottonwood tree about a 1/4 mile downstream from where you picked those flowers. If you decide to come with me, meet me there after your family goes to sleep. Bring only what you can carry in a saddlebag. Clothes, personal items, anything that's really important to you. Leave everything else behind. Elena felt her heart racing again. And if I don't come? Jake's expression grew sad. Then I'll ride on to Wyoming alone, and you'll marry Cornelius Blackwood as planned. But I hope you'll think carefully about what kind of life that will be." Elena walked toward the barn door, then stopped and turned back. "Mr. Caldwell, why are you really doing this? Please tell me the truth." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. "My parents died when I was 17, he said finally. "I've been on my own ever since, working from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to build a real life. I've seen a lot of good people trapped by circumstances they couldn't control, and I always wondered if I would have the courage to help if I ever had the chance." He paused, then continued. "When I heard about your situation, I realized this might be my chance to find out what kind of man I really am, if I can." Elena spent the next 3 days in a state of constant inner turmoil. Every morning she woke up thinking about Jake Caldwell's offer, and every night she went to bed no closer to making a decision. The weight of choosing between her family's survival and her own freedom felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. On Saturday morning, Cornelius Blackwood came to visit again. Elena watched from the kitchen window as he rode up on his expensive horse, dressed in his finest clothes, like he was already celebrating their upcoming wedding. The sight of him made her stomach turn with dread. "Elena, come out and greet your future husband," Papa called from the front porch. Elena forced herself to walk outside and stand beside her father. Blackwood dismounted and approached them with a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, my dear," Blackwood said, reaching for Elena's hand. His grip was too tight and his hands were soft from a life of not doing manual labor. "I trust you're excited about our wedding tomorrow?" Tomorrow. Elena felt like she had been punched in the chest. Somehow, in all her worrying about Jake's offer, she had lost track of exactly how close her wedding day had become. "Yes, sir," she managed to say, though her voice sounded strange, even to her own ears. "I've arranged for Reverend Miller to come to my ranch at 2 o'clock, Blackwood continued, still holding her hand in his uncomfortable grip. "We'll have a simple ceremony, just family and a few neighbors. Then you can settle into your new home." Elena tried not to think about what settling into her new home would mean. She had heard enough whispered conversations between married women to know what happened between husbands and wives, but the thought of sharing that intimacy with Cornelius Blackwood made her feel sick. "That sounds lovely," Elena lied, hoping Blackwood couldn't hear the tremor in her voice. Blackwood studied her face for a moment, and Elena had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her polite act. "You seem nervous, my dear," he said, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "That's perfectly natural for a young bride. But I hope you understand that once we're married, I'll expect you to be a proper, obedient wife. I don't tolerate defiance or foolishness from the women in my household." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, even though he was speaking in a calm, conversational tone. Elena felt her father shift uncomfortably beside her, but he didn't say anything to defend her. "I understand," Elena whispered. "Good," Blackwood replied, finally releasing her hand. "I'll see you tomorrow afternoon then. Wear something appropriate for a wedding, but don't expect anything too fancy. I prefer simple ceremonies." After he left, Elena stood on the porch feeling like she couldn't breathe properly. The reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. In less than 24 hours, she would be married to that cold, threatening man, and her life as Elena Morrison would be over forever. That afternoon, Elena helped her mother prepare her wedding dress from the old curtain fabric they had found in the attic. As Mama pinned and measured, Elena tried to work up the courage to tell her about Jake's offer, but every time she started to speak, the words stuck in her throat. "You're very quiet today," Mama observed, adjusting the neckline of the simple dress. "Are you having second thoughts about the wedding?" Elena looked at her mother in the cracked mirror they had propped against the wall. "Mama, do you think Papa made the right choice? Arranging this marriage, I mean?" Mama's hands stilled on the fabric. For a long moment she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and sad. "Your father is doing what he thinks he has to do to keep this family alive," she said carefully. "But that doesn't mean it's easy for any of us, especially you." "But what if there was another way?" Elena asked. What if someone else offered to help our family? Someone who didn't want anything in return except... She trailed off, unsure how to explain Jake's proposal without sounding completely crazy. Except what? Mama prompted. Nothing, Elena said, losing her nerve. I was just wondering. Mama turned Elena around to face her. Elena, if you have something to tell me, now is the time. Tomorrow will be too late. Elena looked into her mother's kind, worried eyes and made a decision. Mama, there's a man named Jake Caldwell who's been staying in town. He's offered to help our family pay off our debts without requiring me to marry anyone. Mama's eyes widened. What kind of offer? Elena told her mother everything. About meeting Jake, about his land in Wyoming territory, about his proposal that she come with him as a free woman to help establish his ranch. As she spoke, she watched her mother's expression change from surprise to concern to something that looked almost like hope. This man would pay our debts and ask for nothing in return? Mama asked when Elena finished. He would want me to help him build his ranch, but as a business partner, not a wife. He says I could make my own choices about my future once I got to Wyoming. Mama was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, she sat down heavily on Elena's bed and patted the space beside her. Elena, I need to tell you something that I've never told anyone, not even your father. Mama's voice was barely above a whisper. When I was about your age, I had a chance to marry a different man, someone who would have taken me away from here to live in Denver. He was kind and gentle, and I think I could have been happy with him. What happened? My parents had already arranged my marriage to your father, and I was too scared to go against their wishes. I told myself that duty was more important than happiness, that being a good daughter meant doing what my family needed me to do. Mama took Elena's hand. Don't get me wrong. I've had a good life with your father, and I love all of you children more than my own life. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had been brave enough to choose for myself. Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. Are you saying I should accept Jake's offer? I'm saying that you're the only one who can decide what's right for your life, Mama replied. But if this man is offering you a chance at real freedom, and if you believe he's honorable, then maybe you should think very carefully about what you want your future to look like. But what about Papa? What about the money our family needs? If this Jake Caldwell is willing to pay our debts, then your father will have what he needs to save the farm. He might be angry at first, but in his heart, he wants you to be happy and safe. He's just forgotten that in his worry about keeping us all fed and sheltered. That evening, Elena lay in bed next to Clara, listening to her sister's peaceful breathing and thinking about everything her mother had said. Tomorrow was supposed to be her wedding day, but now she had another option, one that terrified her almost as much as marrying Blackwood, but for entirely different reasons. Jake's offer meant leaving everything she had ever known behind. It meant trusting a stranger with her future. It meant traveling hundreds of miles into unknown territory with no guarantee that things would work out the way he promised. But staying meant marrying a man who had probably killed his previous wives. It meant giving up any hope of ever making her own choices or following her own dreams. It meant accepting that her life would be controlled by fear and cruelty from this day forward. Elena got up quietly and walked to the small window that looked out over their property. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. She could see the old oak tree where she often went to think, and beyond it, the road that led to Miller's Creek where Jake was waiting for her answer. As she stood there, Elena thought about all the things she had dreamed of doing with her life. She had always been good with numbers and had secretly imagined working in a bank or helping run a business someday. She loved reading and learning new things, and she had often wondered what it would be like to see places beyond the endless Colorado prairie. If she married Blackwood, all those dreams would die. She would spend the rest of her life trying to stay invisible and safe, hoping each day that she wouldn't anger him enough to earn a beating or worse. But if she went with Jake to Wyoming, she might have a chance to become the person she had always dreamed of being. It was risky and scary, but it was also the first real choice anyone had ever offered her. Elena made her decision. She spent the next hour quietly packing her few precious belongings into a small bag, her mother's silver locket, the book of poetry. Her grandfather had given her Sunday dress and a few practical items of clothing. She wrote 3 letters. One to her parents explaining her decision and promising to send money once she was established in Wyoming. One to Clara asking her to forgive her for leaving without saying goodbye. And one to her brothers telling them to take care of Mama and Papa. She left Jake's money for her family's debts on her father's desk along with the letter explaining everything. She had asked Jake to give her enough extra to leave with her family, so they would have some security while they got back on their feet. Just before dawn, Elena slipped out of the house as quietly as she could. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure it would wake everyone, but the house remained silent as she made her way outside. She had told Jake she would meet him at Miller's Creek after her family went to sleep, but she had been too nervous to wait that long. Instead, she had decided to go early in the morning before anyone woke up to discover what she had done. 2 months after leaving Colorado, Elena stood on a hill overlooking Jake's property in the Wind River Valley of Wyoming Territory, watching the sun set behind the snow-capped mountains that surrounded their new home. The sight still took her breath away, even after several weeks of living here. She had never imagined that the world could be so vast and beautiful. The journey from Colorado had been the most challenging and transformative experience of Elena's life. The wagon train Jake had promised did indeed include the Johnson family, Robert, and Mary Johnson with their 3 children, and an older couple, Henry and Rose Washington, who were planning to open a general store in the growing town of Laramie. At first, Elena had been terrified that the other families would judge her for traveling with a man she wasn't married to. But Jake had handled the situation with such respectability and care that her fears proved unfounded. He had introduced her as his business partner, who was helping him establish a horse ranch, and he had been so consistently proper in his behavior toward her that even the most suspicious members of their traveling party had accepted the arrangement. The 6-week journey had tested Elena in ways she never could have imagined. There were river crossings where she had to help guide frightened horses through rushing water, storms that soaked them to the bone and turned the trail into thick mud, and nights when she had to help stand watch against the possibility of wild animals or hostile encounters. But there were also mornings when she woke up to see landscapes so beautiful they made her want to cry. Evenings spent around the campfire listening to Henry Washington tell stories about his adventures as a young man, and quiet conversations with Jake as they rode side by side through endless miles of prairie and mountains. It was during those conversations that Elena began to understand the kind of man Jake really was. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas with parents who had taught him to value hard work and treat everyone with respect. He described the devastating influenza epidemic that had taken both his parents when he was 17, leaving him alone in the world with nothing but a strong back and a determination to make something of himself. "I spent the next 10 years working on other people's ranches and cattle drives," Jake had told her one evening as they sat by their small campfire, watching the stars come out in the clear mountain air. "I was good at the work, and I saved every penny I could, but I never stayed anywhere long enough to feel like I belonged." "Why not?" Elena had asked. "Fear mostly," Jake had admitted. "Fear that if I got too attached to a place or people, I might lose them the way I lost my parents. It seemed safer to keep moving, to never get too comfortable anywhere." "What changed your mind about settling down?" Jake had looked at her across the fire, his expression serious and thoughtful. "Meeting you, actually. Seeing someone else who was trapped by circumstances beyond their control made me realize that running away from attachment wasn't protecting me from loss. It was just guaranteeing that I'd never have anything worth losing." Elena had felt her heart skip a beat at his words, but she had also felt a flutter of panic. "Jake, I hope you don't think that just because I came with you, I'm ready to—" "I don't expect anything from you," Jake had interrupted gently. "I meant what I said back in Colorado. You're here as a free woman, to make your own choices about your future. But I won't pretend that I don't hope eventually that you might choose to build that future with me." Those words had stayed with Elena throughout the rest of their journey and into their first weeks in Wyoming Territory. Jake had been as good as his word about treating her as a business partner, rather than assuming any claim on her affections. But Elena could see the hope in his eyes whenever he looked at her, and she was beginning to realize that her own feelings were growing stronger every day. The land Jake had inherited from his father was everything he had promised and more. Situated in a valley with a clear stream running through it, surrounded by rolling hills perfect for grazing, it was ideal for raising horses and cattle. The small cabin his father had built was simple but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a main room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen area with a window that looked out toward the mountains. Jake had immediately given Elena the larger of the 2 bedrooms and set about making improvements to the cabin and the property. Within a month of their arrival, he had built a small barn, repaired the fencing around the pasture, and started construction on what would eventually become a larger house. Elena had thrown herself into the work with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. She discovered that she had a natural talent for working with horses, and she found genuine satisfaction in the physical labor of building something from nothing. More importantly, she felt useful and valued in a way she never had before. But it wasn't just the ranch work that made Elena feel fulfilled. About 3 weeks after their arrival in Wyoming, she had met Mrs. Chen, a widow who lived on the neighboring property with her teenage son. Mrs. Chen had immigrated from China 10 years earlier with her husband, who had died the previous winter from pneumonia, leaving her to run their small farm alone. "The territory is growing so fast," Mrs. Chen had told Elena during their first meeting. "New families arriving every week, lots of children who need schooling. I've been thinking about starting a school, but I don't have the education for teaching." Elena's eyes had lit up with interest. "I could help with that. I love teaching, and I have a good education for a frontier woman." Within a week, Elena and Mrs. Chen had partnered to establish a small school in an abandoned building in the nearest settlement, about 5 miles from Jake's ranch. Elena taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to children of all ages, while Mrs. Chen taught practical skills like sewing and basic medicine. The school quickly became the center of the growing community's social life. Parents would gather there for meetings about local issues, and Elena found herself naturally taking on leadership roles in organizing community events and solving problems that affected everyone in the area. For the first time in her life, Elena felt like she was becoming the person she had always been meant to be. She was using her intelligence and education in meaningful ways, contributing to something larger than herself, and making decisions about her own future based on her own desires rather than other people's needs. As autumn approached, Elena realized that her feelings about Jake had evolved from gratitude and friendship into something much deeper. She found herself looking forward to their evening conversations by the fire, noticing the way his face lit up when he smiled, and feeling a warm flutter in her chest when he complimented her work or asked for her opinion about ranch decisions. More importantly, she had come to understand that Jake's feelings for her were based on who she really was, not on what he needed from her or what she could do for him. He valued her intelligence, respected her independence, and seemed to genuinely enjoy her company for its own sake. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the first snow of the season dust the mountain peaks, Jake brought up the subject that had been hovering between them for weeks. "Elena," he said quietly, "I know I promised not to pressure you about anything, and I want you to know that I'm prepared to keep that promise for as long as you need. But I also need you to know that my feelings for you have grown stronger every day we've been here together." Elena felt her heart start to race, but this time it wasn't from fear. "My feelings have changed too," she admitted. "I care about you, Jake, more than I thought I would when I first accepted your offer." "But," Jake prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice, "but I want to be sure that what I'm feeling is real love, not just gratitude or the comfort of companionship." "After such a big change in my life," Elena said honestly, "I want to choose love because it's right, not because it's convenient or expected." Jake smiled, and Elena could see relief and understanding in his expression. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say. You deserve to make that choice freely, without any pressure or hurry. Would you be willing to wait until spring?" Elena asked. "Give me the winter to be completely sure of my own heart?" "I'd wait as long as you needed," Jake replied. "But spring sounds perfect. By then we'll have been through a full year of seasons together. We'll know if we work as partners in all kinds of weather, literally and figuratively. As winter settled, over the Wind River Valley, Elena threw herself into her teaching work and continued to help Jake prepare the ranch for the harsh mountain weather. She found that she loved the rhythm of their daily life together, the morning chores, the shared meals, the evening planning sessions where they talked about improvements they wanted to make to the property and dreams they had for the future. During the long winter evenings, Jake taught Elena to play chess with a set carved from antler that his father had made, and Elena taught Jake to read poetry from the book her grandfather had given her. They talked about everything from practical matters like which crops would grow best in their mountain valley, to philosophical questions about what made a life worth living. Elena also continued to receive letters from her family back in Colorado. Her parents had initially been shocked and hurt by her sudden departure,